The new CSS has pseudo-class is a game changer. Let's see what magic it can do. Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today we'll look at the CSS has selector and several examples of how you can use it in your code. And I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. In my CSS course for beginners, I covered pseudo-classes and pseudo-elements, but now CSS has a new pseudo-class I did not get to cover, and that pseudo-class is has. It can do some amazing things, so let's see how it works, and then we'll look at a few practical examples. Now, the starter code that you see here is available at a GitHub link in the description, and you'll want to open the starter folder to follow along. That's the code that I have here. There's also going to be a completed folder that will have all of the final changes. Now that I have this open in VS Code, I'm going to use the live server extension to launch this project. If you don't have the live server extension, you can go to this icon over here that says extensions and then search for live server and install that extension. I'm going to use it now by clicking go live down here in the bottom of the toolbar, and it should launch the website, and you can see the first page view that I have. We're going to look at a few views today. Now, because most of the code is over here to the left and scrunched up, I'm going to hide the file tree by pressing Control B so we can just see that code. Well, I guess I need to drag it over as well. I did hide the file tree, but I drug it over. Now, I have separate panes here in my screen that I can lock the code to. If you don't have that and you want to have it, I'm in Windows. I'm using Windows Power Toys, and they call that fancy zones, I believe. But anyway, once you define these areas, you can just drag and lock your window to that. Okay, now that we're looking at the first view over here in the CSS, I need to scroll down. We're not going to get into how I did everything with CSS today. We're just looking at the has pseudo class. So it says example 1. Previously, we could only select forwards. And that's the big thing with the has selector. Now we can actually select backwards. We're going to select the parent of an element. So to explain what I mean, I have 3 articles over here in this view, and normally in the past we would have selected, say, an article, and then I can use the sibling selector, so an article next to an article. This is the adjacent sibling selector to be specific, and then I can change the background color, and let's just change this to something we'll notice really well, like Alice Blue, and save. Now look what happened. It changed the background color of the second and the third article here, and that's because they are adjacent. So it selected forwards. It didn't select the first one. It selected this one that was adjacent, and then this one is adjacent to this one. If we made the screen bigger, they would all just be in one row. And that's why those 2 are selected. But now let's do this in reverse with the new has pseudo class. So here we can say article, and then we can use the has pseudo class, and then I can use the adjacent sibling selector. So then I'm saying if this article has an adjacent article, then I'm selecting the first article. So let's go ahead and change these. And now because they come after our change here, they should have the final say if we follow the cascade with CSS. And of course, the specificity has to be at least equal for the one below to take precedent over the one above. But let's go ahead and change this background now to something we'll notice as well, like coral. And I save. And now notice it selected the first 2. So we actually did this in reverse. It said this article has an adjacent article. Well, the first one does have an adjacent article, and then the second one has an adjacent article. So it is just the opposite if you would think about it in that way. But now let's look at some more examples to help you understand what's going on. So I'm going to have example 2 here that says we can do more than just select the parent. And I'll also comment these out so we don't get a bunch of different mixed colors and selections along the way. Of course, you can uncomment them in the completed code. Actually, the starter code won't have that. Now here we go with the second example, and I'm going to have an article, and I'm going to say has, and I'm going to say it has a span element inside it. And you can see I have made this word here bold inside of the second article, and in the third article I have made this text italic, and I have used spans and applied a bold and an italic class to each of those with span elements, which are inline elements. And so just by doing that, we would be selecting whatever has a span inside. Let me go ahead and change the background color to make sure we're making our selection. And I'll just say coral again. I could spell coral correctly and save. And yes, we selected the second and third because they both have span elements in there. Now, say I just want to select the one that has a bold class. So then I can just add the class name afterwards and save. And now I've not only just selected the article, but I actually selected just what this class was applied to, and that is the bold. So let's go ahead and make this a better background color than coral, something we might highlight with here. So I'll say RGBA, and it's 255, 255.0, which is essentially yellow, but then let's make it just a little paler, kind of like the highlight color. So if we do that and save, there we get that nice kind of highlighter just on that word. And so we've not only selected specifically the article that has a span in it, but then we've only selected the class bold. So if we were to bold anything in these articles with a span, then that would apply. Now let's do the same thing with this italic text, but let's underline it. So here we could say article has, and we could say span once again, but now just the italic class, and then we would say text decoration and make that underline. And if we save that, yes, now we have our lorem ipsum underlined right here just in the third article on the page. But any other article that would have a span with an italic class applied would also have that underlined as well. So now let's scroll up for some more room and we'll look at another example, and we can use has with the not pseudo-class as well. And you can see here from my note, it's not has, which would read better actually as does not have, but this is the way we're going to phrase it. So we could say article, and now I'll say not, and then inside of the not, we can use has, and then inside of has, we'll have span once again. So we're saying select the article or articles that do not have a span inside. And then I'll change this background color again, because that's very easy to see when we do that. And I'll just say light gray. And if I save, it only changes the article that does not have a span element inside. So you can use these pseudo-class selectors together. So this is saying select the article that does not have a span inside. So let's get a little more room once again and look at another example. And in this example, we're going to look at or, because has actually supports the or logical condition. So we can say article, and then we can say has, and let's select any article that has a paragraph, and they all do, but also it could be any article that has a button class. And we know we have one button here in our third article, and it does have the class of button as well. So we're saying or, either one, and then let's just change the background color once again, just to check, and let's choose something like Rebecca Purple. I like that one, and save, and they all turned purple, and that's because they all have paragraphs, or we could have just had one with a button. So if we pick something that is not in all of the others, like an input element, and save, then it's just going to select the one that has the button. And since we're looking at or, we should also look at an example of and, but it's not applied in the way you think. And I do want to keep or on the screen as we look at this, because we need to see both for something else that's important that we will discover about example 5 and example 4 at the same time. So here let's say article, and we'll say has, and then we'll say it has a paragraph. Now instead of putting a comma and putting something else or putting an ampersand, the way to say and with has is to just chain another has on. So it has a paragraph and it has a button. And notice I put in the button element instead of the button class. And now here I'm going to change the background dash color, and I'll change this to something else, light salmon. There we go. And save. And we didn't really see anything else apply, did we? Nothing changed. And that's because this doesn't have enough specificity. This does. This is a class. And so it went ahead and applied itself. But here, this did not. Now this selector should only be changing this third one. We wouldn't be changing these others because they don't have a button element as well. But has really takes on the specificity of whatever is passed to it, that it has the highest specificity. And this class right here, class button, has a higher specificity than just an element. And so that's why this didn't apply. If we went ahead and changed this to a class, now we should see it apply. And it does. Okay, I'm going to scroll up for a little more room, and let's look at one more example here before we learn any other applications of has. We just are learning about how to use it here with this first example still. And this is just a more complex example. Let's say I only want to select this article that has a button, and I want to put a little bit more space here. Now there would be other ways to do it, but this is just one example. Imagine we had other paragraphs on the page that weren't inside of an article, and they could possibly be beside buttons as well. So we want to make sure we only select the information or what is inside one of the articles, and it has to have a paragraph and a button. And so this would do that. We'll use article, and we can say has, so it has a paragraph, and then we can say has again, and it has the button class. And after that, then we can go ahead and select the paragraph inside of the article that has an adjacent button class. So we only want to select this paragraph right here that's adjacent to the button. And once we have actually made the selection correct, we can go ahead and change the margin on the bottom of that paragraph. And let's make something like really obvious here at first. I'll say like 4 rem, save. And yeah, it gave a lot more space there. And of course, I might just want that to be 2 rem, which wouldn't be nearly as big. But if you wanted to specifically select only the paragraph that was adjacent to a button and only the paragraph that was inside of an article at the same time, it's a little more complicated selector, but it gets the job done. Okay, I think we're ready for a little more practical example. And this example is going to be something that would keep us from creating some extra modifier classes and having to apply them in our HTML as well. I'll get a little extra space here, and it's going to apply to the next page here. And let's look at this page. You can see we have a menu at the top, like a nav bar. And if I mouse over locations, we see some different locations. If I mouse over employees, we see some different employees. If I mouse over about, it's just going to take us to the about page if we had one, which I haven't put links here. However, there's no indicator for locations or employees that there is any drop-down menu at all. We don't have that. And if we were to use modifier classes, we would have to go into the HTML manually and apply one here and apply one here if we were going to modify and provide any other indication that there was a drop-down menu below. However, we can accomplish this with the has pseudo-class as well. Right now, I'm just going to apply something to all of them so we know it's working. And I've got a nav 2_item class. If you're using the BEM naming convention, that's what this is from with the 2 underscores. It's not a modifier. It's just naming a block there that is in the nav. So we have a nav item, and then I would select the after pseudo element. And from there, we could apply an icon. So I'll say font-family. I've already imported Font Awesome at the top, and this is Font Awesome 5 free. I know they're on to a newer version, but it's what I quickly grabbed. And I'll say font weight 400. Now the content, this is where I'm specifying from Font Awesome, and I use the Unicode code for that, and it's F150 here. And then margin dash left. Let's give it just a little bit of space and say 1 rem. And now this should put, well, it's not actually after it, but it put it on every item. We don't want that at all. And I think I can scroll up to the actual nav item and quickly add what we need to get these icons to the right as well. I thought I had already applied that, so I'll say display flex, and then it's flex flow, and it's going to be a row no wrap, and then we will align the items in the center, and let's see what we get. Yep, that looks a lot better. So now let's come back to where we have applied this, but it applied it to every item, and that's absolutely not what we want. So as a quick example, if I had a modifier class that I was only going to apply to the 2 elements that need it, I would do something like this with the BEM naming convention. As a modifier has the 2 dashes, and we'd create this class. Now this class isn't applied to anything right now, but I could apply it to these 2 elements, and they would just be here on the top. However, we don't have to do that. No need to create this class. We can just apply it with has. So I'm going to delete this dash dash icon, and here I'm just going to say has, and then I'll say .nav submenu. Oh, I need 2 underscores there as well. Submenu. And then I'm choosing the after pseudo element there and save. And now it's only applied to the 2 that it needs to be applied to. And that's because I'm asking if the nav item has a submenu inside it. And I can pull up the HTML. It's going to be a little bit large here, so I'll need to use the full screen. But let's scroll down and look at this. So we have a list item, and then it has locations here. But then notice it has a submenu inside the list item. So I was asking if this submenu was in there. And if so, once again, we applied something to the parent. So we looked backwards. And I'll come back to the style, drag this back over, but that's how we only apply it to those top 2. Very useful, especially if you were dynamically generating this. You were pulling in data and you couldn't manually apply. You actually had to automatically apply. If submenus existed, then this would be very useful. Okay, I have a few more examples. I'm going to scroll down to where we're ready to apply these examples. And the first one is a modal, something we would normally do with JavaScript. And that's the point here with the has pseudo-class. We can do some things we would normally do with JavaScript, and now we can just do them with CSS and the has pseudo-class. So let's scroll down here on the page too, because I've got another page, and notice it has this modal right here in the middle. It says has is awesome. Do you agree? Right now we can check the box. Nothing happens. But we can easily make something happen with the has pseudo-class. So I'll just choose my awesome class, and that is the modal, and then I'll say it has, and if it has dot awesome 2 underscores terms, and that is the checkbox, if those are checked, we're just looking at what it is, then we're going to say display none. Essentially, they've agreed to the terms. And of course, we could retrieve this information with JavaScript as well if we wanted to, but this part can just be handled with CSS. Now I'm going to check the box, and it's gone. And this brings us to the next toggle. We have toggle dark mode here. And so this another quick example of how we can apply something if it's checked. Now I am in the third view here, which I gave a class of 3. It's a section element with the class 3. I'm going to say it has, and then the class light switch is applied to this toggle. So as class light switch, and it is checked as well. And if that's the case, I'm just going to reverse the default color values that we have for the page. So here background dash color, and actually I set them for the specific section even, if I remember correctly. So here we have the var, and instead of background color, I'm going to use color that we were using for text. And then for color, I'm going to use the var, and it's going to be the background color variable that I use. So we're just flip-flopping those colors. I'll save this. I'll need to check our box again so we can see the other toggles. And now I'll toggle dark mode, and we immediately switch to dark mode. And I believe, like I said, I only did it for that section. Yes, I did, which you could apply this to the full body of the page if you wanted to. I just wanted to break these examples into sections. So untoggle and toggle works just fine. And also notice I'm using the same variables I would use if I set this to prefers dark mode and used media queries, which you can do, of course, to automatically switch to dark mode or light mode based on the user preferences that they have set on their computer. And so this is a nice companion for that, to add a light switch. Now, as much as I like dark mode, I'm going to uncheck it for now just so we can toggle bubbles as well. And of course, we could toggle dark mode with bubbles if we wanted to, but let's go ahead and set this up. It's also in 3 because that's the same section that we're in. So I'm going to say has, and I just named this bubble switch. And then if it is checked, we're going to apply some bubbles to the page. And I'm going to paste this in, but this is exactly from, I just grabbed this code from my images tutorial or my CSS images tutorial, and that is part of my CSS for Beginners course. If you want to learn how to apply these things, it's wrapping here, and it looks even crazier than it probably should look if you're not familiar with this. But I'm going to apply this bubble images to the background. I'm also going to apply a linear gradient color, and then I'm setting the background size here, especially of the bubbles, so it doesn't take up the full page. Anyway, we'll see how it looks after I save, Of course, get rid of our modal again, and now just toggle bubbles. Now here's the gradient, so it's more blue to the right and light over here to the left, but we have bubbles on the page. You could do that for the full body of your page too. I just did it for this one section. And you might be curious how it looks with dark mode. It's really only going to change the text when we apply the dark mode because this background is coming after setting the background here. If we wanted dark mode to be applied instead, we would need to move that down as far as the cascade goes. But I'll just uncheck that and we can see it just fine, or we can go back to normal or go back to dark mode without the bubbles. But I kind of like the bubbles, so we'll leave them there. And just one more useful example, so I'll scroll down a little bit more. We can go ahead and put it above that line I put in the code. Let's scroll down here and we have one more view that just has a label and a text input. So with that, we can go ahead now and select something once again in reverse. Before we could only select forward, so the label would have to come after the input. Now it doesn't have to, and it's more natural really to put the label first and then the input. That's the way I would want to do things anyway. But now we can actually change the label based on what's in the input. So let's just select label, and then we'll say has, and now I have a break, a line break. If we were to look at the HTML, there is a BR element. So the name, the label here for name, is not adjacent to the input. So I can't just say plus, which is the adjacent sibling, and then I have a name class. That won't work. And we could go ahead and test that by saying color, and let's just make it red. Didn't change anything, doesn't work. What we need is the general sibling selector, which is the tilde, the little squiggly line there. Once we do that, now name switch to red. But that's not what we want to do. I just wanted to show the difference. So when it's not adjacent, you need to use a different selector, the general sibling selector, and then it selects all that match going forward from there. But what I want to do is apply a check mark when this field is valid. So first, let's just make sure we can apply the check mark. So I'll say content, and now here, this is going to be in quotes, but I'm going to press the Windows key and the period that brings up emojis. You can also get emojis in other places like emojipedia.com and other places on the web, however you find them. However, here Windows can do it with the Windows key and then press a period. So I'm just going to type check, and then they come up. I'll choose this check mark. So now I have that. And of course, we can't just apply content to anything. We really need to apply it to the pseudo element. After is where I want to put it. There's also a before, of course. We're going to put it after. And then I want the color of the check to be lime green. And I'm going to say margin left and give that 1 rem so it's not right up against it. Now after that, you can see our check mark over here. It's a little hard to see on this gray background, but overall you could see it. And of course, we could even make it bigger. Say we said font size 3 rem, we should have a big check mark, right? Yep, that's a big check mark now. So we can do that, but what if we just want to set it for valid or invalid? We don't want this to show all the time. Well, there is a pseudo-class for that. So we say valid, and now it needs to match what we've put in for our check. I've made this required, but I've also applied a pattern to this input, and you can see that in the HTML. I'll scroll that over, or pull that over, and then scroll down actually. And you can see this required pattern. I'll do Alt-Z to wrap down. Here it's required. I set the pattern equal to a regex that says it must start with a capital letter, and it's going to need to be at least 3 characters. Of course, we start counting at 0, 1, 2. So then you can have uppercase and lowercase after the capital letter. It's going to need at least 3 characters. So that is the pattern. Come back to the CSS, bring this over, and you can see if it works as far as valid. So I'll say Ted, that's 3 characters, but I didn't start with a capital. So we didn't get a check mark. But if I start with a capital T and then type Ted, we've got our check mark. Now I'll delete Ted's name, and there's something else I want to show. You could do this. I don't really do this because I don't want a red mark right away beside the label, but you could also have an invalid. So I'll type invalid here. I'm selecting the same thing. Otherwise, I'll make sure this is red here, and instead of a red check mark, I'll delete that. Again, the Windows key and the period, I'll just say I want an X, and here's an X. Now I can put that in. It's also 3 rem. And of course, you get the red X right away because it's invalid, it's not matching. Now, there is a blank class, but it has basically no support at this time. So that would say, hey, the input is empty, and we could choose that as well and set it separately if it had support, but right now it doesn't. I don't do this because I don't want to see this red right away, but I did want to show that is an option. So I'm just going to comment it out, and I will leave it in for the code. So now I'm on the Can I Use website, where you can always check to see how much support any feature has. We can look at this has pseudo selector or pseudo class, and you can see it has 81.7%, but it is flagged here. What is really missing, we can see it has support in Safari, it has support in Edge, and it has support in Chrome. What it's really missing is Firefox, but there are flags. The support is coming, and you could check back every week. It keeps increasing, really. So we expect this feature to be fully supported very, very soon. So that's good news. Like I was saying, I just do want to show you the blank pseudo class that I was talking about. Here is the CSS selector blank, it says, and it has zero support. So don't try to use it, but I just wanted to show you because I mentioned it, not gas. Here we go. Has. That would be funny if there was a pseudo class called gas, but we'll just stick with has. So has support, and it keeps getting more support. So you can start playing around with this, and I think it's really going to help eliminate some classes we were creating, especially modifiers, and it's going to start doing some things for us in CSS that we were previously using JavaScript for. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.